have a dance performance. Not by me. But we're going to have one. Well, if you want me, I can do it. I can fake it. Namaste Saraswati Deve. What? You have one? That's fine.
Hare Krishna, I'd like to welcome His Grace Mahatma Prabhu. First time he's been here to this house. Thank you for coming. Hare Krishna. He's here for a week, isn't it? A week? In classes every day. Temple. Here, Bhakti Center. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Hare Krishna.
So we were told there's going to be a dance.
Yeah, I think she's coming.
Should we wait? So over here?
Yeah, who's
You're going to have to clear this space.
oh, yeah.
Hare Krishna. While we're waiting, so while we're waiting, I can tell a story. I can tell a story that I heard today. I think it's a special story. There was I don't know the exact situation, but There was a devotee who was arrested for being a devotee. Somehow or other, they didn't want her to be a devotee. And so she was arrested, she was put in jail, and they hired someone with those black arts to do something to break her bhakti. It's like what you would call in India, a witch. Not the wicked witch of the West, but a witch in the sense that they know these mantras, which are very dark and can do dark things. So this lady, she didn't know what to do, and this witch was brought into the cell. And she was doing her black arts on her. And then this lady, she paid obeisances to Prabhupada, Namo Vishnu Pradaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale, like that. And then, soon after that, this witch left the cell. And the warden said, "Why did you leave?" And she said, "Because when she was chanting this mantra, a sadhu appeared behind him, pointing at me, and he told me, get out of here." And so I can see he's very powerful, and I left. So the power of paying obeisances to Prabhupada. Isn't that interesting? There's another story. A devotee was on the beach where it was this was in Detroit, in America, and the devotee was in a park chanting his Gayatri, and all of a sudden he saw Prabhupada. So he paid obeisances, and then Prabhupada walked by him while he was chanting Gayatri. And then when he initially paid obeisances, Prabhupada didn't see him. So when Prabhupada saw him, he was not paying obeisances. And then Prabhupada turned to the devotees and said, "Why didn't this devotee pay obeisances?" And they said, "Oh, Prabhupada, he was chanting Gayatri." He said, "What's the use of his Gayatri? It's all useless. He didn't pay obeisances." So this, of course, he did pay, but Prabhupada didn't see it. But this devotee said, "From that point on, I always pay obeisances before I chant my Gayatri, and I always pay obeisances after I chant my Gayatri." So I thought those are two nice stories about paying obeisances to your spiritual master and to Prabhupada. So Namo Vishnu Pradaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vinod Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaura Jai Prabhupada. So, we're ready? Hare Krishna. Okay, so there's 10 million people watching you. Don't be nervous. No problem. Maybe we should put this over here.
Based on choke and Swami, which is Jagannath and Krishna. So, thank you very much for watching, and well, thank you for Suvarna with the cartels, Surat on the Mridanga, and Armando on the flute. Wish us all the best. We have a performance next week for another major spiritual program. So, thank you so much for watching.
Thanks, Anand very much for a wonderful performance. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
More? More dancing? Raghunath wanted to introduce me, and everyone who introduces me always says the wrong thing. If they read some old obscure website that has like outdated information. So, I met Prabhupada for the first time in December of 1969, and then the following month I moved into temple as a brahmacharya. In a place called Berkeley, which is across the bay from San Francisco. And when I became a devotee, there were maybe 300 devotees in the world. And there were 17 temples in the world, and 6 of them were in California. And the movement has become quite different. In those days, the majority of the movement were brahmachari and brahmacharini, just young people joining. And the Grihasthas, they lived kind of like brahmacharis and brahmacharinis, sometimes living in the temple or living very simply. And in those days, we didn't understand much about Grihastha life, and we weren't doing such a good job. Actually, we're doing a pretty bad job. In fact, it's quite rare to find anyone who was married at that time in 1970, still married today to the same person. They may still be married, but to be married to that same person, that's rare. And those who have done it or married in the early 70s who are still married, I think they're amazing. And I appreciate them very much. When what happened in those days, up till around 1972, anyone who wanted to marry would ask Prabhupada for his blessings. Anyone in the movement would have to get his blessings personally. So I was married, I think, must have been 1971, and I was given blessings. But shortly after, by 1972, when many of the Grihasthas were having difficulty It became a huge disturbance to Prabhupada. And a lot of the difficulty was just due to immaturity. And it was also due to what we could call artificial renunciation. People finding that Grihastha life was difficult and wanting to renounce it. And so around 1972, Prabhupada said something quite interesting. Maybe you know, maybe you'll just learn now. He said, if you want to get married, don't ask me. I will not bless any more marriages. And you take the responsibility yourself. So it was kind of a frustration that Prabhupada had with so many marriages when we're not doing well. And Prabhupada's idea was that in our culture in the West, there's mingling of men and women, so it wasn't, at least in the beginning of the movement, he didn't really see the possibility of establishing much of a brahmacharini ashram. Because most of the devotees had girlfriends or boyfriends, so he would say, get married and live peacefully. That was his idea. Live peacefully. But that's not exactly what was happening in every case. Sometimes it was the opposite. So he was upset. And you'll find there are many, many letters in which Prabhupada was explaining about the duties of grihasthas, the husband, the wife. And what's so interesting, this is very, very interesting, just a historical, sociological look at what happened. I remember being in Los Angeles in 1972, and Prabhupada in 1970 had spent 7 months in Los Angeles. That was the Western World Headquarters. That was like the Mayapur of the West. So he spent 7 months there. I don't think he spent 7 months anywhere since then. In 1972, when I was there, he spent 3 months. So teaching us every day Bhagavatam class, teaching us so many things. And darshans every day. And morning walks every day. And he had given us so many instructions on Grihastha life. And one devotee compiled a book of those instructions, all the letters, all the conversations, all the purports. It was big, photocopied, or in those days maybe it was Xerox, copied, of all of Prabhupada's instructions. And it was free. Everybody could access it. And what I find so interesting is that in spite of all those instructions, the Grihastha ashram was very shaky, and many of the marriages were not successful. Many of the marriages broke up. A lot of the men wanted to take sannyas, leave their wives. Young women, 22, 23, with a child. So Prabhupada was quite frustrated. And in many of the letters that he wrote, he wasn't really even writing about varnashram principles. He was just writing about growing up and being responsible. That was the main thing. So it's kind of interesting if you read Prabhupada's letters, because in a lot of the letters, he's dealing with practical things that the devotees perhaps didn't learn from their own parents. Or they didn't learn in school. And what we came to call, or one devotee named it granny wisdom. Because Prabhupada was giving us a lot of granny wisdom. Like things we should have known, things we should have learned. Common sense. And so he would tell us things like, Grihastha life will sometimes be difficult, and it's your responsibility to take care of your wife and family. And we were entering it from the brahmacarya ashram. So we were thinking, well, I used to be a full-time devotee, and I was distributing books, and now I'm working, and I have so many responsibilities in the family, and we were feeling like we had failed Prabhupada. And so many of us wanted to give it up. He said, well, better we become sannyasis. We're failing Prabhupada. And he would say, no, this is your dharma, this is your duty, do this. He never made us feel like we were failing. The only way he made us feel like we were failing is when we weren't responsible. We weren't making it work. So he really wanted us to make it work. That's why he was so frustrated when it wasn't working. That he didn't want to have anything to do with marrying anyone anymore. Of course, now things are different to some degree, and we understand that when you're married you have kids and you can't listen to class because you have to be with your kids. And we understand that. And we understand, we're more realistic about what Grihastha ashrama is. And we understand the value of it and the need of it, and how so few of us are able to live a renounced life. And many of us in those days thought we could live a renounced life, and when we got married we just thought, oh, that was a mistake, I shouldn't live a renounced life. And for most of us it wasn't possible. So Prabhupada was trying to communicate that to us, and you read all these letters, and if you look at them now, especially for those of us who are older, it's like the same thing that we're telling the young Grihasthas that Prabhupada was telling us. It's like total common sense. And it's so funny to tell people the same thing that Prabhupada told us that we couldn't understand when we were 22. I couldn't understand any of it. And now I'm saying the same thing. So Prabhupada was just basically telling us what your grandfather would tell you, or your mother and father. Just be responsible and take care of your family. And yes, it's difficult. And what else is new? Everything's difficult, like that. I was married, as I said, 1971, so I was 21 years old. And no one had told me, given me any idea of what it was like to be Grihastha, what my duties were, what attitudes I should have. And even I asked them, and they didn't say anything. Apparently, they didn't really know either. And I think like many men, maybe women also, I can't speak for women, but like many men, we're kind of thrown off guard. We didn't really know what was involved. We didn't, we may have had sisters, of course we had mothers, but in that relationship, it's different. And so a lot of us were not familiar with female nature, and we had a hard time dealing with it. And what was difficult for us as young men is that some of our godbrothers were sannyasis, and so they didn't have the same problem we had. They were free, and we weren't. And they would come to the temple, and you would see them, and you would get these crazy ideas that I've made a mistake, I should be renounced. And so Prabhupada was getting lots and lots of requests for sannyas from Grihasthas newly married. That was just to give you an idea of what we were going through. And so the context of many of those instructions were just to get people to come down to the ground and be responsible, even though it was difficult, and even though it was taking time away from sadhana and full-time preaching. So actually, I have to be vulnerable and admit I was one of those who asked Prabhupada to take sannyas. And I actually had a child. This was not uncommon. Okay, it sounds crazy, but it was quite common that young men at the age of 22 or 23 with children 1 year old were asking Prabhupada if they could take sannyas because it was like they couldn't deal with it, and it was taking away from their preaching. So I wrote Prabhupada, and Prabhupada saw that I was completely unqualified to take sannyas. So fortunately for me, he didn't allow me. He did allow others, most of whom were not able to maintain it. But in the letter he said, first thing is you become a responsible Grihastha. And unless you become a responsible Grihastha, I will not give you sannyas, because you're irresponsible, and if you take sannyas, you'll be irresponsible. Make sense? Yeah. Makes perfect sense, although 2 years later, suffering in the Grihastha ashram, I wrote another letter to Prabhupada. Can I do it now? I can't. So it's... But I have to explain why. Because there was a very unhealthy attitude towards Grihastha ashram at that point. And the most interesting thing is that unhealthy attitude certainly wasn't coming from Prabhupada. It was coming from us, for misinterpreting Prabhupada's instructions, and also so in the Bhagavatam, it talks about materialistic household life and spiritual world, but that's also the verse about Grihastha life. Once in, you may never get out. And it compares it to a well. And if you've seen a well, wells are a few hundred feet deep, and once you fall in, if no one's around, you don't get out. And even if someone's around, I don't know if you get out. And they have to throw a rope that's long enough, and they have to pull you out. So this example was given. Of course, it was a verse by Prahlad Maharaj. The fact was that it was describing materialistic people in Grihastha ashram. It wasn't describing devotees. But sannyasis were preaching that this is Grihastha life. And so we were thinking, oh, I made this huge mistake. I got married. And now it's like hopeless. I'll never get out, and so on and so forth. Do you have any phone geniuses who can figure out why this says my card is full after I just erased like 100 pictures and videos this morning? And every time it says it's full, it knocks me off Facebook. Does anybody know why?
The cloud or something?
Did you go into the trash and remove it from the trash?
No, I didn't. You know how to remove it on a Samsung? This is not an Apple.
I have that.
I see Apple doesn't. I think Samsung does. I wouldn't even know how. Is there a trash on the Samsung? Does anyone know? You know how to go into the trash?
She's actually delete, because I tried to delete photos once and it was not deleting them because it was connected to the cloud, some setting or something. And
No, I'm not connected. I did delete them. At least I thought. Anyway. So in any case, there was a very dysfunctional and discouraging attitude towards the Grihastha ashram. And it was the cause of failure. Many failures in the Grihastha ashram, because it especially made the men think that they had made a mistake, they were wasting their time. And then Prabhupada said, if you're a brahmachari, 75% chance you'll go back to Godhead. If you're a Grihastha, 25%. But many times when Prabhupada was asked by men if they could take sannyas, he said something very encouraging. He said, you are already sannyas. In fact, you're more than sannyas because you're living with women, money, opulence, and so forth, and you're detached, so you're better than sannyas because they don't live with it. So Prabhupada was really trying to help us understand that it didn't matter. That in any ashram you could be Krishna conscious and you find the ashram that is best for you. Then some of those men, again, when they wanted to take sannyasis was later. Maybe a few years later it started happening again. And Prabhupada would say to them, Grihasthas, you don't need a pole to preach. Because you get a pole when you take sannyas. You don't need a pole to preach. When I was a Grihastha, I was also preaching. So if you want to preach, who's stopping you? So we, again, thinking that the material situation was the cause of the problem. So in 1973, I believe it was, one of my godbrothers, his name was Madhukara, one who makes honey. Or it means one who begs. It's a stage. of life where you beg like a honeybee. So you make like a bee. And he wanted to leave his wife and take sannyas. Prabhupada said something so beautiful. The man was saying, you know, it's not conducive for my Krishna consciousness to be married. And Prabhupada said, this is how a neophyte thinks. He thinks that his Krishna consciousness depends on the situation, the external environment. And he said, that's not true. So it was a beautiful letter, you know, basic, take responsibility for your life and situation. And your Krishna consciousness is not dependent on Grihastha or sannyas or anything. It's dependent on you. Let's wait till it goes off again. Because right now it's okay. So what I've found, we're trying to fix this shutting off and on. So if we lose you, we will come back to you. Just hold on. We still love you, but we have to do some work here. Okay. Okay. We're back. We're good. Okay. Don't give up on us. I think it keeps shooting them off anyway. So I have been in many situations in my life which from an external perspective would not be considered conducive or ideally conducive. And interestingly enough, those situations, I believe, made me stronger than I would have been if I were in an ideal situation. You know, sometimes, if you're married, you know this to be true. Sometimes the Grihastha ashram is challenging, to put it mildly. You know, you're saying, yes, that's the understatement of the year, maybe the understatement of our lifetime. Yeah. You ever had those moments? When you just walk outside, you go, oh my God, I can't deal with this. I emptied like 8 videos this morning, and about 50 pictures.
You got unnecessary files.
What?
You got unnecessary files. You can.
I
took some stuff off, but you've still got a lot on WhatsApp, but I don't know what to delete off WhatsApp. So
we can figure out how to delete WhatsApp without deleting WhatsApp. Just deleting all the pictures without.
files that get through WhatsApp.
If somebody knows, so we can try afterwards. That's the problem with having WhatsApp. Someone convinced me to have WhatsApp a few years ago. I didn't want to do it. So what I've come to realize is that every time there's a challenge, there's a difficulty, it's like a blessing, an opportunity to become better or to learn skills or to develop attitudes that I haven't had or to remove dysfunctional attitudes, just to be better. And it seems that Krishna puts us in those situations because we need it, or sometimes when you're married, there are these temporary evaporation. So, and those are the moments that, no, I didn't marry the wrong person, I just have to become a different person. That's the problem. I'm still the same person that's not adapting to that person. So if we think of it that way, those moments are empowering, definitely empowering. And rather than become discouraged like we did when we were young and ask Prabhupada if we could run away and take sannyas, to face it, and as Prabhupada told me, do it first, and once you do it, then we'll talk about being qualified to give it up. Don't give it up prematurely. And I think we can apply that to every aspect of life. And the other thing, which I think is obvious, that no matter what ashram you choose, it has its own set of austerity. So the austerities of sannyas or brahmacharya are different than the austerities of grihastha life, but nonetheless they're austerities. And we need austerities because sense gratification and material comfort, if we have too much of it, it's not good. And so the world is so arranged that there will be austerity, and that reminds us that we're not God. Because if things are too nice, we start to think, I don't want to say we think we're God, but you know what I mean. We think everything's okay. So it's good sometimes that things aren't okay, and that's helpful. And so Krishna has given you the perfect husband or the perfect wife to let you know what's wrong with you, to keep you humble, to keep you working hard and perform austerity and keep you in line and help you grow. That's how we have to see it. Not that I want this imaginary fairy tale prince or princess and live happily forever after and Swargaloka. That's not our goal. And that was Prabhupada's mood. Okay, this is your husband, this is your wife, this is what Krishna has sent you. So do your duty, do it properly, and be Krishna conscious in this situation. That's the challenge. How to be Krishna conscious in this situation. Don't complain about it. Accept it, figure out how to deal with it. It's not always easy, but that's what Prabhupada's asking us. Make it successful, make it work. Set an example for others. And be an example for your husband or wife. That's something. I mean, there's so many things we can say about Grihastha life, but I'm not maybe the best example of the ideal Grihastha. So I sometimes feel like awkward talking about it. I could be a better example. I mean, I'm okay. But, my policy is, my vow is, talk about what you live. So at least I haven't left my wife, so I can talk about taking responsibility. But maybe you want to speak about something, you have some comments or questions? Or disagreements? Yes?
You said about conflicts in relationships, and kind of like from that saying, deal with it, take responsibility, this is your ashram, this is the person you're living with, and deal with it, be mature and just do your duty. But like, is there any value in like emotional process going, you can keep all your emotions inside and just do your duty, and you still have resentment and like complicated emotions going on?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I would say that's part of what's necessary to do your duty. There's a saying: if you're not willing to forgive, don't get married. Because love is an endless act of forgiveness. You'll have to always forgive proactively. And there are so many other things we have to learn to be able to live with a person, like acceptance, fulfilling another's needs. My wife has done a lot of training in counseling and marriage counseling. And one of the things, when you study it, she studied under people who have been researching for 40 years about what makes marriages work. And really it boils down to something that maybe is a bit counterintuitive, that your whole focus is to fulfill the other person's needs. And most of us get married to fulfill our own needs, isn't it? And so what the research tells us is if you fulfill another person's needs, they'll be so grateful, they'll fulfill your needs. But if you're emotionally dependent or weak, maybe you can't do that. Because it's all about, you're supposed to fulfill my needs, and I'm so weak, I can't fulfill my own needs. So I need you to fulfill my needs. And that can create a lot of dysfunction in marriage. So maturing is necessary as part of that process. So being able to express yourself, how you feel without offending the person, expressing sometimes your own needs that your spouse may not be aware of, if you feel that's important for the relationship. There's so many things. There's one example that's given, is that when you live that close with another person, they're very much a mirror for you. And so a lot of things we don't like about our spouse is just the mirror that they're holding up. It's the things we don't like about ourselves, and they're holding it up. Could you put the mirror down? No, this is you. Just put it down. I don't want to see it. No, just look at it. This is you. I'm trying to help you. No, just put it. I don't like what I see. Okay? Just put it. So, but they can't help but have that mirror, because that's the nature of the relationship. And so if we accept it in a positive way, that this person is showing me what I'm like, and I'll have to face it at some point in my life. And if I'm going to survive in this marriage without driving one another a little crazy, we're going to have to deal with it. I just did a retreat in Mayapur, and one of the things we were dealing with was the running away from problems syndrome that many of us, or maybe all of us, are dealing with. When something is difficult, what do? Pretend it doesn't exist, or I'll deal with it tomorrow, or I'll block it in the closet, deal with it later. There was a famous counselor, teacher, and she said in her counseling, whenever she hit a point in which a resistance came from that person, like this is the thing they need to be dealing with, and they resisted it, they would always say something like, can we talk about this next week? Or I have to go to the bathroom now. Or posture would change, they'd start coughing. Something. So it's definitely difficult to deal with difficult things that are hard to face because we resist them. But in marriage, you can't live with a person your whole life and run away from those things. If you want to have a good, you can, but the marriage won't be that good. And those issues will always be buried underneath, and they'll come up and around. So we need to learn to face the issues. And so when our spouse says, like if your wife says, we have to talk, for most men, they'd rather like jump off, 10 stories than say, well, yeah, I'm really happy to talk. No, like, can we do anything but talk? Because she's going to talk about something you're doing that you feel you can't change, you can't control, there's some excuse. So it's hard. But if you don't talk about it, it's more difficult. And so I've learned that the best thing we can do is face those things we resist. Because if we don't, they disrupt our life. And so when my wife says, now, when she says, can we talk, I have a different attitude. Previously, it was the same. Why do we need to talk? Everything's fine. No, everything is not fine for me. Well, it's not fine for me. Men tend to think everything's fine more than women. So by understanding the need to deal with these issues, now it's much easier for me. She says we have to talk. I'm like, okay, let's talk, because I see how important it is. So that's something you have to learn in Grihastha life, and that's why Grihastha life can be difficult, because we don't all come in to married life with these skills. We just find someone we like hanging with, but hanging with someone and living with them is two different things. And being in a committed relationship, then you see all kinds of things, just normal things about people, normal imperfect people, both us and them. And so, in my experience in Grihastha life and in counseling people, it's so much about those issues, how you deal in relationships. It's funny, because I was reading a book once. I was at a devotee's house, and he had this book, and I'd heard about this book. It was called, The Road Less Traveled. It was a famous book. Scott Peck, The Road Less Traveled. So I had heard this book, and I heard devotees quote it, and so I opened it up. It was a sequel to The Road Less Traveled. I opened it up. First thing I read is, the average adult does not mature beyond the age of 11. That was like the first thing I read. And I saw something today that a lady was describing her husband as an overgrown child. So, I was reflecting on that. What did they mean? And it was explained later in the book that most people stop maturing emotionally at around 8 to 11. That's what they say, 8 to 11. And if they don't work on it, they stay there. And so what he pointed out was, let's say when you were a kid, and right, or you were aggressive and you fought, or whatever your survival mode was, you probably still do it. So you get in a fight with your wife and you just, I don't want to talk about this, and you shut the door. That's exactly what you did when your mother said, clean your room. I don't want to talk about it, and you shut the door. Isn't it? You know, so you're still 11. But it's nice to be aware of it because you can do something about being 11. But if you don't do something about being 11, then, you know, it's really hard for your wife because she's married to an 11-year-old, an overgrown 11-year-old. You know? So that's not fair for her, is it? And of course not fair for you. So I found that very interesting. And in my counseling of Grihastha couples, I see that. A lot of times that's the only problem. You have immature people who have whatever past samskars or samskars they picked up in this life or habits, conditioning, and they got married and they didn't have to deal with them because they never lived with anybody. No one ever told them it was a problem. And it wasn't a problem for the guys. You just go out, you know, Friday night, Saturday night, you know, do what you do, and you go home. Or you live with them, but you live in your own room. It doesn't matter. You have your own bathroom. Yeah. With guys, it doesn't even matter if you're dirty. They don't even notice. When you get married, your wife notices. So everything's different, you know. And so most of us, or many of us, didn't learn all the skills we did. So yeah, so a lot of Prabhupada's letters are just dealing with practical stuff like this. Take care of her, be kind, and so forth. Like, why do you need your spiritual master to tell you to be nice to your wife? So it's like, what's wrong with you? Isn't it? Well, I read here in the Shastra, you know, the wife should do whatever the husband says, you know. You know, so that's unfortunate. We have a lot of things in Shastra which we misunderstand. You know, so, I'm in charge. You do, you know, and it's 2019, and I still get this. Women writing me letters. My husband said I'm supposed to do whatever he says, and et cetera, et cetera. And she's completely miserable, and he doesn't do anything about it. There's a nice story. We have a godbrother. He read, you know, wife. At least he thought he read the wife should do whatever the husband says. So he went to Prabhupada and said, Srila Prabhupada. He's really funny. He's like a cartoon character, but he's not trying to be. He just is. Srila Prabhupada. Some cartoon character. Anyway, he would make a great cartoon character. Srila Prabhupada. Should the wife do whatever the husband says? And Prabhupada said, and you should be so arrogant to think like that. You know, so that also is a challenge that sometimes we have. Here's the ideal. Look at the ideal wife, Devahuti, or there's so many examples. Sarmishta. Who was it? Sarmishta. What was the other one? Chaivana Muni's. Devayani. Chaivana Muni's wife. You know, he was irritable, and she was always nice, and you know, the Vedic wife. And I was talking to some devotees, and I was saying, Prabhu, have you seen a Vedic wife in your lifetime? No. I don't think you know, like this, like we have a concept that our wives are going to be Vedic. We don't know what a Vedic wife is, and even if we knew, we haven't seen. Have you seen anybody like Devayani or Devahuti lately? No, it's an impossibility. So we're also dealing with that, which has an effect on us, maybe consciously or subconsciously, that, you know, I'm always right because I'm a man, and she's always wrong because she's a woman. And you may not believe that, but, you know, there's a few classes that may have gotten in there that have some, you know, when push comes to shove and you're having the argument, you pull that, you know, you pull that trick out of your pocket. Well, you're the wife, you should do what I say. Isn't it? So, you know, we're dealing with that stuff. And that's what it means to be married, to deal with your stuff. As Krishna Das, the great kirtan leader, said, when asked, what is kirtan? It means to deal with your stuff. But I think that's the meaning of Grihastha life. To deal with your stuff. Isn't it? And we need these skills when your husband or your wife is just totally emotional about something that makes absolutely no sense to you, and they shouldn't be that way. And you can't deal with it logically because that's the wrong thing to do. You just have to listen to it and agree with it and be sympathetic. But that's not easy. You've been there? You've seen it? Yeah. So these are the skills we have to learn. How to listen. Every devotee needs these skills. How to listen to something we don't agree with and be sympathetic and empathetic to it. That's not easy, and it's definitely a challenge, and it's definitely a problem within our movement. If somebody has a challenge and we think they're in Maya, sometimes we just tell them instead of listening to them. I mean, look at this. I was made a temple president. I had just turned 20. I was used to being in charge since I'm 20, right? And pretty much I've been in charge, and now I'm 69. How easy is it to listen to people when you've been in charge since you're 20 years old? It's an incredible challenge. I'm just used to telling people what to do. So if you look at leaders in our movement who are made presidents when they're 20, 21 and have been presidents in GBC and sannyasis, if they have the ability to lead, it's an amazing quality because they've always been telling people what to do. And if a man can listen to his wife who's been in those leadership positions, that's amazing ability. He needs that ability, but it's not always easy. And you come home, you work for Microsoft, you're a big executive, you got 500 people under you bowing down to you every day, and you have to come home and wash the dishes. As soon as you walk in there, dishes, they're there, they're waiting for you. Okay, whatever you say. That's not so easy. Haribol. So yeah, I sometimes joke, but I'm half serious. And I told this joke in front of sannyasis. I said, when you're a sannyasi, I just can't imagine how you become humble. Because everywhere you go, everyone's bowing down, everyone's praising you. But if you're Grihastha, you go home and you put in your place by your wife. So it's really easy to be humble because you don't have to try. You don't really have to be humble. It will be pointed out what you're doing wrong. And every spot on your dough, and every crumb you drop when you're eating, and every drop of water on the toilet seat and the floor, and every piece of dirt in the sink, it will be pointed out. But it's true. And I have an interesting experience because I stay with a lot of Grihasthas, and because I'm a Grihastha, I know what it means to be Grihastha. So sometimes prasadam's late, or sometimes the kids are disturbing, or sometimes they'll pick me up late, and they'll always be apologizing, and I never get upset. And they're kind of like taken back. They say, well, why don't you get up? They're almost asking me, why don't you get upset? I can see that it's kind of like the sannyasis get upset when that happens. Because they're not used to that, because they're not married. And I say, Prabhu, I'm married, I'm sorry we left late. Do you realize I'm married? We never leave on time. 5 minutes is always a half hour. I know that, I'm married. But if you're a sannyasi, you don't know 5 minutes turns into a half an hour, because the women are getting ready. So, these things, they help us. If we see it that way, they help us. Not that, sannyasa is not good, and not that our sannyasis aren't humble. It's a joke, but there's truth to it. Isn't there? Yes?
What would your practical suggestion be for those people who are still living?
Still single?
Like you were giving an example that, the average person is 11 years old.
Oh, what would I suggest for those 11-year-olds? Well, self-awareness. Become aware when you're acting like a 7-year-old so you can catch yourself and then try to, whatever your age is, 35, 40, it's like, tell yourself, I'm 40 years old, I should act like I'm 40, how should a 40, you can actually do it. But it begins with awareness of what you're doing that's immature. Like, just by reading that, I became very aware of my immaturity. And occasionally I would act immaturely, but I would immediately apologize to my wife. I'd say, I'm sorry I did that. These are the reasons. And I would see, another thing I would see is sometimes I was channeling my mother. Because my mother used to get upset at me, and then sometimes I would get upset at my wife in the same way my mother got upset with me. That's also immaturity. Irresponsibility is immaturity. Blaming your wife for your problems is immaturity. Blaming your kids for your, I can't tell my rounds good because blah, 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 blah. There may be some truth to it, but too much blaming, too many excuses. It's immaturity. And have you ever been around adults when they've acted immaturely and you asked yourself, how old are they? Because they seem about 8. I think we've all had that experience. So we just have to turn that around and do that on ourselves. And if you're aware of it, you'll start, now that you're aware, you'll start to notice. And if you don't, you can ask your wife, can you please tell me when I act like I'm 11? And she'll probably say, I've been telling you that for 20 years. You haven't admitted it. So, but we all do that. But we all don't have to do that. And another thing that I've noticed in those rare godbrothers who are still married, 50 years later, 48 years later, they're very mature people. They're very understanding, they're very grounded, they're very humble people, they're very real. Have you noticed that? Like those devotees who have good marriages and been married a long time, they're very grounded, they're very real, they're very nice. So, those are qualities that are necessary. They're mature people. They don't get upset because the husband or wife, left a drop of water on the floor or something stupid. They don't even get upset when the wife crashes the car by driving into a pole. You know that my wife has done it once or twice. The classic, the wife calls in, I just got in an accident, and the husband says, how's the car? That's the male problem. Isn't it? Yeah. So these are challenges that we all have. And again, if you take it in a positive way, and you say, okay, well, this is good. These are things I'm going through as a Grihastha, so it'll help me grow. I strongly feel that if you can work out things in a way to have a good relationship with your wife or your husband, it helps you tremendously in all your other relationships. Because sometimes I see devotees and they really have a hard time getting along, working together, cooperating. They're very independent. And I often think, wow, his wife probably has a really hard time because he doesn't listen to anybody. So, it's not like it just happens in one place, I've noticed since I've become a spiritual master, it's something I didn't realize, and it's just a learning curve, that disciples who don't get along with other disciples generally don't even get along with their guru. It happens everywhere, not just one place. So there's a saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. So, you master a good relationship with your wife, it requires the same skills you'll need to have good relationships with others and vice versa. So I can't say it's an absolute principle, but it's something that I notice. Is that okay, or you want more? You want the 10 steps to emotional maturity? There's probably some books on it, but I think if, as devotees, we can be quite reflective and humble, and I think if we just look at ourselves, we'll start to understand when we're acting immaturely and what mature behavior would be in that situation. It would be reasonable, balanced, understanding, grounded, not erratic. It would be very sattvic. One of the lessons that I learned that has helped me so much in marriage is when there's any disagreement or disaccord, I always try to think, rather than this way, fighting this way, let's go this way, let's find the common ground. that we can agree on. Otherwise, we're just talking this way. Well, I think you should do that. I think you should do this. What is it that we both want from this? And when we identify what we want, it's here, and then we can talk about how we can get here. I think that's maturity, rather than, you said this, you said that, you told me this. Where does that go? Say, what are we fighting about? We're fighting about a harmonious relationship. So if that's what we want, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how we can get what we want, rather than trying to pound one another. And just fighting all the time? What's that? That's not very mature. That's what kids do. Why did you, honey, why did you do that? Because you did this first. That's what 8-year-olds say. Right? Why did you hit him? Because he hit me first. Isn't it? I teach forgiveness, and one of the things that often we're not aware of is people's behavior, which we feel is offensive, is often in response to our behavior, and we're not even aware of what we did that caused them to react the way they did. That's immaturity. You did this, you're bad. What did I do? Could I have done anything that caused it? These are the kind of reflections we do. Is that okay? Yes.
What about if sometimes you do things but you don't intend on doing, like affecting the person, and they get affected, and then you realise afterwards, like I did that, but I didn't think that it was I didn't think of how it would impact the other person. I was just doing it for my own reflection.
Yeah.
And then other people get. I mean, what do you do in that circumstance? Because you can't always control what other people are thinking, but you know what I mean?
Oh, I definitely know what you mean. Yeah. Well, it's true you can't always know, but over time you start to see patterns.
So do you think that you should think about everything that you say and do, because and how it's going to impact other people, even though they might be your own reflections? Like, you should you should think about what's coming out, because it might, other people might get offended. Is that a problem, or do you think you should just say what you're thinking because it's your own reflection? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you can say what you think and how you feel, but be ready for the consequences.
Yeah. But what if you're thinking from yourself and then other people think
you're
in
weird?
relation to them?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It depends on your position and how much effect you have on people. The more you have effect on people, the more careful you have to be. Like if we look at Prabhupada, most of the time he was encouraging. He wasn't chastising, and he was not chastising everybody. He was only chastising certain people. So I think he even though it's the duty of the guru to chastise and correct, he was very sparingly doing that, because I think he knew that we could become easily discouraged. In relationship with husband and wife, I would say definitely yes, you have to be careful. You have to know. And maybe what you said wasn't wrong, and the guy across the street wouldn't have had a problem, but your husband did because he's a different person. And so because you want to have a relationship with him, you have to be careful. And of course, you can talk about it, but I would, it seems to depend on the relationship, how close it is and how you want it. And I know from personal experience, I make that mistake often. I was joking once with a devotee, and he stopped talking to me. So I didn't know him that well. I was asking him about his name, and I thought his name is Indra Pramad, and I thought his name meant Crazy Indra, because Pramad means mad. And I was just joking, and he didn't know me, so he didn't know. I'm from California, and he's from New York, and it's a different culture. In California, it's much more laid back, and he thought I was offending him. I had to be told by someone that he was offended. I had to apologize. So it's definitely difficult. But obviously sometimes something has to be said, and it is going to be upsetting for some people. But I think in general that's not the case, that it can be said without doing it. And it'll often put you in a difficult situation to say something that could disturb people and disturb relationships. Is that your experience?
Oh, sometimes without you intending on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then, I mean, it always settles down. So.
I think a lot has to do with better understanding people and what their needs are. Because different people have different needs. And some people have needs to be appreciated more strongly than others. Some people would rather you're just straight with them and not beat around the bush. Other people will do better if you're just very kind and appreciative. And so I think there's a lot to be said about being sensitive to that, because that could help people. So it's not, okay, this is how I feel and I should say how I feel. Okay, that's okay. But how is it going to affect other people? Would that discourage them in their spiritual life? And sometimes you'll find that just an encouraging word can make a huge difference, even though you could correct that person. But the correction is not going to help them. So then what's the point of telling it like it is if it hurts them? Satyam, priyam, you should speak truthfully, it should be pleasing, and it should be beneficial. And what else should it be? It shouldn't be agitating.
What happens if you find it helpful for yourself, so you would think that it would be helpful for other people? But then some people don't find that helpful.
No, because we're all different.
So that's a challenge also.
Yeah, it's a challenge of getting out of our subjective world and being in the world of another. It's difficult but necessary. And we always can't do it, because sometimes people are so different we wouldn't even expect that someone would get upset. You know, I've said things that upset people, and I couldn't imagine in a million years why would they get upset. But later learning about them, then I understood why they got upset. Or that was the same thing their father always told them. But they're from Russia and I'm from America, and it doesn't mean the same thing in America. And you know, for 3 months they hate me until we talk about it. And I said, well, in America it means this. And I go, oh, I thought it meant that. No, I was praising you. Well, I thought you were criticizing. You know, relationships, like, they're not easy. It's going to happen, but it should at least shouldn't happen with the people you're closest to. We should know what upsets them. You know, sometimes, for example, I would see that my wife could do something. She's talented in a certain area. I would say, it would really be good if you do this. But it wasn't inspiring to her. So she would say something, you know, a little sarcastically, but made the point and said, thank you for that suggestion. If I want your advice, I'll ask you for it. And she'd say, thank you for that suggestion. I don't want to do that. That's not something that inspires me. And if I need your advice, I'll ask you for it. So I was just trying to, you know, I thought she would be inspired by it, but she wasn't. So, you know, the intention was good, but the result wasn't so great. So then she might say, well, you should know that wouldn't inspire me. We've been married for 25 years. You should know that. So you kind of let me down, you know. So that's part of the difficulty of relationships. And different cultures. When you're with people in different cultures, you have to act differently, because your actions will be interpreted in different ways. Same action in Australia will be seen in India differently. And it may be disrespected there. You know, you're too straightforward. It'll be disrespected here if you're not straightforward. And they're disrespected if you're straightforward. Yes? Do we have any Indians here? Yes. There's a hierarchy of respect. And if you're too straightforward, it won't be valued. If you're a Westerner sometimes, if you're pretentious, and yes, whatever you say, and then behind the back criticize, that's okay in India. They just accept that. As long as you're respectful in front. And behind, you'll say whatever. That's the culture. Here our culture is, don't say it behind. If you have an issue, say it to me. That won't work there. Yes, you agree? You know, you can't tell your father, you can't be so straightforward with him. You have to be respectful. So, yeah, you have to learn these things. Yes? My experience. Yes, sir.
You were talking about in the early days how very young, 20s, a lot of devotees in the early 20s, was trying to maybe get out of Grihastha life and take sannyas. Seems like we're at the other end of the spectrum in this day and age where a lot of us are like a lot older than that, but we're sort of too comfortable maybe in a Grihastha ashram and there's not much mood of maybe detachment. Not that we should run away from the situation, we should be responsible, but maybe we're lacking a bit of detachment and preaching spirit.
My wife told me she should never let me take sannyas. So I was thinking about this very thing. And think about how many Grihasthas in the last 10 years have taken sannyas. I can only think of maybe 2 of my granddaughters. And so many who are the age of sannyas or beyond who aren't thinking about it. And there's no particular advantage for them to do it because they're already renounced. So, it's supposed to be that when the kids are grown up, then you start winding down. Whether it's vanaprastha or sannyasas, the issue is, okay, give some stuff away and maybe move into a smaller place, start traveling, more service. That's the idea. So however you do it, that's the idea. Now, I had a learning experience. I was thinking, when my daughter gets married, then she'll get married in the next 3, 4, 5 years or so. And then it's like, okay. Then the winding down can go into 4th gear, 5th gear, overdrive. And now I'm seeing my godbrother surrounded by grandchildren. And I'm like, it's not as easy as I thought. And my wife is saying, when our daughter's married and she has kids, well, wherever the kids are, I think I'm going to live there. Maybe she'll move to Australia, maybe England. So they go, okay. So it's like an endless loop. But still, our Shastra teaches that we should simplify our lives when we're older and prepare ourselves for full engagement in hearing and chanting. That's the idea. However you do that, you find the best way. If you're not qualified for sannyas, why take it? If your wife is not going to be well situated or your kids and you take sannyas, what's the point? Yes.
In relationship to that, we read in the Bhagavad Gita that the real sannyasi is the one who's not attached to the fruit of his actions. At the same time, I was listening to a class of Prabhupada where he gives sannyas to Buddhas. He even uses the word sannyasini in relation to the Buddha.
Yes.
He's really emphasizing take sannyas. So, what's the deeper principles behind this conversation?
Well, I think we have to understand that Prabhupada did things and then saw how they went and then readjusted. So the actual figures are 45 men took sannyas, 17 made it. How many does that leave that didn't make it? 28 didn't make it. Any statisticians here who can figure out the percentages? 17 out of 45, what's that? A little less than 2/3, right?
35, 6%.
35% made it? Like 35.6% made it. So Prabhupada needed sannyasis to spread the movement. But he said something, it was quite interesting. When sannyasis were falling down, Prabhupada said, in battle, there will be casualties. And he said, none of you are actually qualified to be sannyasis, but we give you a chance. So it was something like that. Jamuna was very renounced. And Prabhupada, seeing how renounced she was, and she wasn't attached to being married, thought, well, okay, let her husband take sannyas. In that position, he's completely free to engage in service. So if someone can take sannyas, it's an ideal situation. You can be engaged 24/7. And his wife was happy that he took sannyas, as far as I know. But later on in reflecting, there was a point where Prabhupada didn't want to give anyone sannyas because he didn't feel they were qualified. So that's there also. So it's an individual thing. And then of course Guru Das wasn't able to maintain it. And I don't even know if he wanted it. Probably just Prabhupada wanted him to do it, so he did it. And we've had a lot of time to reflect on the value of it. And Prabhupada himself was readjusting as he was going. Is that okay? What do we do now? We chant the mantra Sharira Avijaja or Hare Krishna?
Small questions.
Any other questions? Comments? Disagreements?
Have a percentage of how many Grihasthas have made it?
How many Grihasthas made it with one wife or one husband?
Yeah.
Now? I don't know. I can only say from the early days because I knew so many devotees then. Now? I don't know. Not enough. Until it's 100%, it's not enough. And at least we can say Prabhupada wanted it to be 100%. So if you do get married, then that's your goal. Make it work. Somehow or other, make it work. Do what you have to do to make it work because it's an ashram. And that's very important to be successful in your ashram. For sure. So make it work just as you would as a brahmacharya, vanaprastha, sannyasi. Make it work. Same thing. Okay? Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So we can have a little kirtan. Go ahead. Can we get the kartals in the hands of the right people? Sai Prabhupada ki jai, Lord Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Sri Gauri Jai ki jai, Jagannath Swami ki jai. Hare Krishna. Gauranga.